It's time for Tab Talks, your weekly conversation about matters of faith. I'm your host, Jennifer Rash.
And I'm your co-host, Debbie Campbell.
All right, we're taking Tab Talks outside this week, and we're going with the Storied Outdoors, a new podcast, relatively new anyway, from the fall. And we have with us the co-host from the Storied Outdoors, Dr. Bryan Gill and Brad Hill. Welcome, guys.
Hey, thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on.
All right. Well, you two are not outdoors at the moment, I can tell, but I see some outdoorsy stuff behind you. So you guys are living the topic. Tell us a little bit about what the title of this podcast means, and we'll get into some of the topics that you covered. But what's the title, The Storied Outdoors? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, we call this podcast, we say this, a podcast somewhere between Lewis and Tolkien and Lewis and Clark. And just to be clear, we're not comparing ourselves to those men in any way.
I was going to be pretty impressed.
But that is a wide spectrum in which this podcast falls. And so
we sit comfortably in the somewhere.
Yeah,
okay.
That's right. And so, what we were, our backgrounds are definitely ministry centered. Brad and I met about 18 years ago, traveling for the Alabama State Board of Missions, Baptist Collegiate Ministries and youth ministry, doing camps during the summer. And I was the speaker, and Brad and his team they were the music and the band. And so we traveled together for a couple of summers and got to build a friendship that has just lasted. And recently we've grown to a little bit closer in our affinity for fly fishing. And that's kind of how this whole thing started.
Yeah, we were on a trip earlier this year. We had escaped quarantine and headed up to Blue Ridge to catch some trout, and we were listening to an essay, an audio book, so to speak, but it was an essay, not an entire book. John Girach, and he was just telling stories about fishing trips, and me and Bryan started dreaming and go, man, we could do something like that, but maybe have a little more purpose in the stories and wrap in some of the things that we've learned about faith, because the other part of our intro is finding clarity in the stories we tell, in the adventures that shape us.
Yeah, and so what we started to just kind of throw around was this idea of us writing essays that were you were able to kind of bring in a faith component to what we learned from the outdoors and what God teaches us from the outdoors and enjoying his creation. And with Brad's background in being a vocalist and such a good singer, he has a very strong voice. So we just thought, well, what if we wrote these essays and have Brad read them as an audio book or as an audio short story type thing, an essay. And man, the result that we started hearing from what Brad produced was really exciting. And it started making us think, okay, well, maybe we can write a few more of these things. And then before long, we started getting asking some other people to be on the podcast that have other areas, spheres of influence. And we developed 8 episodes for season 1, 4 essays and 4 interviews. And man, we could not be more pleased with the response and just the conversations that we had with those individuals. We had a gardener, we had a golfer,
ultra
marathoner. Rick Burgess was on the show and was talking about how God kind of paved the way for some healing to happen on their family farm after the loss of their son Bronner. And so, it's been a wide range of stories that a lot of people have not heard before. And that's kind of what we're wanting to focus on, was the untold stories.
Yeah. Yeah, if it happens outdoors for us, it's sort of fair game. So anything, it doesn't have to be, because, we started to ask the question, at least I did in my own heart, is, do we really need another podcast out there? There are lots of podcasts. We're on one right now. There's so much content.
But this one is like very needed. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Right.
I mean,
I hear you. We're happy to be on it. But there's lots of content. And so, if we're going to put effort towards something, we wanted to know, is this worthy? Is this a worthy effort? And so we looked around at Outdoors podcast, and it seemed like they were on one end of the spectrum or the other. They were, Tool Time with Tim, and all they were talking about were like equipment and very, very far on the outdoors. And it's like we're on, a fishing show, and it's all dudes.
Masculine.
Yeah, it's all dudes, and there's no spirituality, there's no reflection, there's no learning about why we're doing what we're doing. And then and I know I hate to say this and sound this way, but if it was on the spiritual spectrum, it was very cheesy. Okay. It was a little too preachy for us. We get enough of that. And so how can we find somewhere in the middle that is reflecting on our experiences outside? God has shown us all so many things. If we look back into our experiences growing up and things outdoors and trips and camping trips or fishing trips or experiences in the outdoors that have strengthened and deepened our belief or deepened our understanding of who God is and what God has done, and do that in a reflective storytelling way.
And I love your essays because it does let us get to know each of you a little better. But your writing skills are amazing too in there. And then yes, Brad, your voice, wow,
Yeah. Brad, do you do all the music that's behind the podcast?
I did. I was
been able
looking
to
at
listen to a few of them.
Yeah, I was like, I can buy some canned bumper music, or I can make it. I think I'll just make it. So I did. Yes, I did.
Well, people are in for a great surprise there too. It's good.
Yeah, he's such a talented musician.
To tell us a little bit about what you're doing, your day job, if you will, when you're not doing podcasting, Brad, with the music.
So I'm the worship and missions pastor for Mars Hill Church down in Mobile, Alabama. And I've been here for almost 15 years now in some capacity, but 7 years as a full-time employee. So, but in my spare time, when I'm not, leading worship or pastoral duties, I got into triathlon. That's one of the big things that I spend a lot of time outdoors, training for triathlon, something to keep me fit. And then fly fishing, it's my other thing that have anything to do with being fit, but has everything to do with being outside.
I love that.
That's great.
Bryan, tell us about your day job.
Yeah, I work at Samford University, where I am an administrator and an instructor, part-time instructor. And so, I live here in Birmingham, and just down the road is where I work. And I get to work with some fantastic people, lots of friends of the Alabama Baptist media. And so we're very thankful for your friendship and the relationship there.
Absolutely.
So have you guys finished your first season up?
We did. We wrapped up season 1 at the beginning of at the end of November.
Yeah, the 29th, I think, was our last episode.
Yeah, somewhere around there. And so we had, but all of this was pre-recorded, and so we had been finished recording since I'm guessing September or August, and we're actually about 2/3. You think 2/3 of the way through season 2 at this point? Well
into season 2, yeah.
And so
they record a lot ahead. We tend to be kind of week to week, but they're like doing seasons, and they're away.
Yeah.
Well, that was really to set the expectations so that there's not a weekly expectation on us, because we do have other responsibilities.
Oh, come on, the challenge, Bryan. This would be the challenge.
I know that's the part that scared me the most.
Yeah. Hey, next week we're going to jump off to Alaska. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Don't we wish, Bryan?
Yeah, that's phase 3. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You need a budget and a sponsor to send you all the places.
Oh, we're open to sponsors. Yes.
Oh, that would be good.
Yeah, and speaking of that, we're not sponsored by anyone, but we do have a website that we try to put more content than just the podcast, and so we've done book reviews, and we've had some guest bloggers who have done book reviews for us, and we've also done some product reviews of things that we just enjoy. We're not getting paid for this, but we want other people to enjoy the outdoors, and we want to equip them with some practical things that they could use in the outdoors.
Well, help us understand, how did you guys get to be such an expert in the outdoors? Did this happen?
Well, now, expert may be that's a term I'm not willing to take on.
Ooh, okay. What would
We
be
just didn't
enjoy it.
Yeah, we definitely enjoy it.
I'm an expert at enjoying it, but I don't know that I'm an expert at anything in the outdoors.
Right. And
I can tell you how not to do some stuff.
Yeah. There are going to be some people who listen to this podcast and they're like, wow, these guys are so amateur. They don't know what they're doing. But then there's going to be some people who are like, oh, wow, I would really learn to love the fly fish. And so we're somewhere in between. We're not experts.
There it is.
Back to that somewhere in between thing.
Somewhere in between.
Okay, let me rephrase then. Who influenced each of you to love the outdoors?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a softball. That would be my dad. I mean, I honestly, from the time I was trying to keep up with his long strides in the woods until, up until the year before he passed away, it was we spent so much time together fishing and hunting and doing things in the outdoors. Absolutely, my dad.
Yeah, I mean, that was just our upbringing, both of us. I mean, I grew up in Monroeville, Alabama, a very small town, and so there wasn't a whole lot to do inside. And this was long before video games. We kind of were at the very beginning of video games, but I didn't spend a whole lot of time inside. It was always outdoors doing something. You're listening to Dab Talk. I'm your host, Jennifer Rash, and I'm here with co-host Debbie Campbell. We are talking about the Storied Outdoors podcast with Dr. Bryan Gill and Brad Hill. They are the host and the outdoors enthusiast. I'm trying to find the right term for you guys. Not experts. You enjoy it. Enthusiast. How about that? Is that something?
Enthusiast. That's a great one.
What do you think? Is it? Am I getting closer? I know, somewhere in between, right? I got you.
There it is. Yeah.
All right. Well, tell us a little bit about what we can expect in season 2 of the Storied Outdoors.
Yeah, it's going to be, I think we're going to get a little longer. We're going to have a couple more additional episodes for season 2. I'm excited about some particular guest. One is an older pastor that authored a book called The Art of Pastoring. David Hansen, as somebody I'm excited to hear his conversation, is a book that I use with all my pastoral interns, and lots of his anecdotes and things within his book are all fly fishing and outdoors. He was pastoring out in Montana, and so I thought he would be a great conversation, and it turned out to be a wonderful conversation. More stories and some essays that we'll be getting to. Actually, a couple of those that began the conversation for the podcast, really.
Yeah, I'm probably, if I'm being a little bit biased, but I think that season 2 essays are stronger than season 1 essays. One of them, I think Brad and I both get a little bit more personal in some of our reflection. I know that I talk a lot about the passing of my father, which was a couple of years ago, and being able to reflect on that, and also just some successes and failures. We're not afraid to talk about our failures, and we do more of that in season 2. But yeah, it's coming along really nicely, and what I think we're most excited about is branching out into people who do things that we don't do. I'm not an ultra marathoner. I'm not an avid gardener. But we get people on here like that. We get people on here who have pastored for 50 years, and who are really strong writers, and we're able to kind of promote their books and other things. But we just like to hear people's stories and to really expand our horizons more than just hunting and fishing and hiking and camping and kayaking and any of the things that we enjoy in the outdoors. We would like to hear stories of things that we don't normally do, really.
Yeah, one of them we just recently recorded was a good friend of mine who's he works for the Coast Guard, and so living in Mobile, and there's a lot of the Coast Guard employees that come to our church and that serve in the Coast Guard here in Mobile, because there's a huge base right here on the Gulf Coast. And so he tells an incredible story about some things that happened when he he's one of the in-flight mechanics for the MH-60, which is the larger helicopter for the Coast Guard, and they do lots of search and rescue. And he was a part of the efforts in Hurricane Harvey that hit Houston back in 2017. So an incredible story. And we commented that much of the interior of the country are oblivious to what the Coast Guard does. We here in Mobile see them all the time, and I know them, and we know what they do. But if you live in Iowa, or you live in even Nashville, or even North Alabama for that matter, you're oblivious to who's the Coast Guard and what do they do. And so it was really cool to have this conversation and to hear, how the Lord taught him and shaped him through some legit adventures for sure.
Yeah, that's one of the. Go ahead. No, I was going to say this. The one of the things we like to ask people at the end of our podcast is, "What's your next adventure?" And that answer has varied greatly.
All over the map, yeah.
All over the map. So that's a lot. That's a lot of fun to see where people like to spend their time outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you come up with all the different topics that you cover? I know you start with what you all love to do,
Mm-hmm.
but in finding a lot of these different people, do you just kind of stumble onto them, or what?
Yeah, I mean, when you're kind of looking, you'll find it. We have friends who they like to dive, they're divers. And so you start talking to those types of people, and then the stories come out, and you're like, that's the story. That's what that's what we want to hear about. That's what people need to hear.
Mm.
As far as the essays go, I think that it's just a matter of things that really stick out to us, and how God has taught us through the outdoors. And then we just start to write about it. And we've said it before, it's not always an extraordinary story. It's just God working through the mundane, and it happened to be outside.
Yeah, every now and then there's an epic story, but most of the time it's just your everyday, ordinary trips that you can see in the small places, God doing big things and teaching you things about himself.
And I think that's kind of where we are trying to encourage people to look for those ways that God is shaping you. Even if it is a mundane activity, or just a run-of-the-mill fishing trip or hiking trip, what is God teaching you, and how is he using his creation to illustrate his lesson to you, even if it's a small one?
And that kind of jumps off of when you mentioned the word reflection. I think earlier you were talking about reflecting. Tell us a little bit more about that and what you hope to achieve with your podcast and helping other people reflect.
I know for me personally, as we started to brainstorm about this on that road trip, there was a phrase. We were with these fishing guides in Blue Ridge, Georgia, and my guide was giving me direction on where to fish and for these trout. And he used this term, nervous waters, he said. And what he's talking about, there are calm bits of the water on the river, and then as it moves and goes around tree stumps or rocks, there are ripples in the water. And he called that water nervous water. And that's where the fish would hang out. And I just thought, as I thought about that time and I reflected on that trip, I riffed, as it were, as a musician would say, I riffed on, what does that mean, nervous water? And we all find ourselves in the current, in nervous water, in difficult water that's always moving. And especially, earlier this year, we were all in some nervous waters, not knowing what was coming downstream. But it's there that, it's there that we grow stronger. It's there that we learn. And it's taking, statements like that and riffing on them and go, how do we learn from this? How do we learn from this experience? At least that's been my experience and what's kind of helped me to write. Because Bryan's the natural writer, and I'm definitely the weaker writer of the two, and I'm okay with that because I can tell the stories, but it's helped. Those things are helping to write my own and reflect on my own experiences. Is how do I look back at experiences in the past and go, what was God trying to teach me, and how did I grow deeper in my faith about Him?
Yeah, and I think that that's one thing that we as Christians ought to do more often is the slow down, reflect on what we just experienced, and see where God is teaching us. And get away from this, why is this happening to me, to what are you teaching me, God? And even if it's not a profound lesson, God is always working in our lives to shape us into the person he wants us to be. And if we're not slowing down, and if we're not taking time to reflect on our experiences, we're going to miss some things. We're going to miss some lessons that God's trying to teach us. And so we spend a lot of our free time with our children, with our families outside. And so naturally, a lot of our experiences are going to happen outside, and just having the discipline to take time and reflect on those experiences. That's what we're trying to do. And honestly, Brad and I set a goal, and our goal was not to have X number of listeners. It was to get these stories recorded and kind of solidified so that one day our children could listen to them and they could learn more about us. So if the only people who ever hear these stories and these essays are our children, then we've succeeded, because that's something that Brad and I would have loved to have had as children.
Absolutely.
All right. So can I get a sneak peek? Will you guys read a little bit for us?
Oh yeah, I suppose so. I do.
Yeah, this is from which one are you going to read, Brad? Is this the uncharted territory?
Yeah. Did you say you wanted to do a little bit of the very beginning?
Yeah, just I guess go to a natural stopping point.
Yeah, one of the things that we try to do in all of our essays is quotes from writers. You know, we talk about Lewis and Tolkien, but there are lots of other writers and great quotes that we want to point people to, books that we've read and things that have influenced us. So each of our essays always begin with a quote from somewhere. And Bryan chose for uncharted territory. There is Heraclius says, "No man ever steps into the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man." So I stood along the rocky bank of the St. Mary Lake, overlooking the Rocky Mountains of Glacier National Park, and exhaled. Gentle ripples clapped against the pebbles beneath my boots. The cusp of autumn was evident in the chill of the gentle breeze that made me zip up my coat. The vibrant flora that speckled my trail with orange, yellow, and red was a sure sign of summer's end. The peaks of surrounding mountains towered some 4,000 feet above me. I felt small. I felt insignificant. But I was thankful to be feeling anything at all. Thankful I wasn't numb anymore. Ayn Rand once wrote, "For a few moments while this lasts, it's all right to surrender completely, to forget everything and just permit yourself to feel." Permitting myself to feel was part of the reason for this trip. So that's how it begins right there.
Can't leave us with that. Come on,
Oh, yes.
Okay, so that's part of season 2, correct?
That's season 2. That will most likely be the opening episode of season 2.
Okay, and when does season 2 launch?
We haven't nailed down a date yet, but we're looking at sometime in February.
Okay.
Yeah, late February.
Late February or early March.
Okay, and you can find the Storied Outdoors anywhere you get your podcasts?
Anywhere
you get podcasts.
Okay.
And in fact, as we started this podcast, I realized 2 things.
Okay.
This is way easier than it should be. And I didn't know half of these podcast platforms existed until they started showing up in the little service that we used. But yes, pretty much any podcast platform that you use, you should be able to find the Storied Outdoors.
Okay. All right. Well, any final tips for people out there who might be wanting to start their podcast up this year?
Oh man,
it's really easy. Yeah.
Go for it.
Go for it. You know, the just jump and do it. You know, even if you don't make a podcast out of it, go find an adventure and write your own stories.
There you go. I think reflecting on stories and getting outside is really our hope, is because there's lots of treasures just waiting to be uncovered outside, and treasures that are going to inevitably, if you look long enough, are going to point you towards the Lord and towards Christ and Christ crucified and risen. So
fantastic. And what a great phase of time, season of life that you started this in the whole pandemic year, right? So
just trying to get a little bit of hope into the world in some very unsettled times.
Indeed.
All right. Well,
Thank you so much.
thank you both for joining us.
Yeah.
And again, it's the Storied Outdoors podcast with Bryan Gill and Brad Hill. Thank you both. I appreciate y'all. And thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week.